Keep Trey's name out your mouth, Pat, before this gets embarrassing for you.
Yeah, you heard that right. LeBron James stepped in to shut down Patrick Beverley after his weird-ass comments on Trae Young. And the crazy part? It all started with a harmless Twitter question about the All-Star game. Today, we'll be breaking down how this beef went from one harmless fan tweet to Trae Young publicly embarrassing Beverley, and LeBron putting him in his place. Wait till you hear how Kevin Durant also destroyed Beverley. But to get why this spiraled so fast, we need to rewind to where it all began. The whole thing kicked off in the most Patrick Beverley way possible. Not in a game, not in practice, but on social media. Some random fan went on Twitter and asked why guys play harder in summer pickup runs than they do in the actual All-Star game. Pretty harmless question, except that Pat couldn't resist jumping in with one of those "I speak for everybody" type of comments. He posted something along the lines of, "Because All-Stars take the game for granted, not one All-Star on the court, good bump." Basically saying the open run players play harder than the All-Stars, and then implying Trae Young was part of the problem. He didn't even tag him, but the subtext was clear enough that fans connected the dots right away. Trae saw it, and instead of getting loud, he kept it real simple. He replied, "Relax. Let us speak for ourselves." 8 words. No cursing, no big speech, and just enough to make Pat look like he was trying to hide behind the whole NBA to push his own opinion. And honestly, that's what stung. Because Beverley wasn't just giving his take. He was trying to make it sound like the players didn't respect the All-Star games, and Trae checked him instantly. And the internet ate it up. Within minutes, screenshots of the back and forth were everywhere. Fans started posting highlight reels of Trae pulling up from the logo, waving goodbye to the Knicks crowd, bowing at Madison Square Garden, and basically reminding everyone, this dude's resume is too real for Pat to act like nobody rates him. At the same time, you had people digging up Beverley's stats, and let's just say when your career average is single-digit points, you probably shouldn't be the one gatekeeping All-Star conversations. That contrast between Trae's quiet clapback versus Pat's loud energy is what made people immediately side with Trae. It wasn't even about Hawks fans. Neutral NBA fans were laughing because the balance of power felt so lopsided. It's like a bench guy trying to lecture a franchise star. But here's the kicker. This could have ended right there. You know, a small social spat, a couple memes, and people move on. But if you know Pat Beverley, you know he doesn't just let things go. This is a guy who's built his whole brand on being the loudest voice in the room, whether he's on the floor or on a mic. So instead of letting it fade, he doubled down and took the beef to his podcast. That's when it turned from a petty exchange into a full-blown storyline. Because the second Beverley decided to turn Trae's name into content, the beef wasn't just about All-Stars anymore. It became about credibility, careers, and clout. So on his Pat Bev podcast, he circled right back to Trae. Not just once, but multiple times. And instead of talking basketball respectfully, he started framing Trae as the guy nobody in the league takes seriously. He painted him as a scorer with stats, but not respect. The kind of player teammates supposedly complain about behind closed doors.
Well, what is it? What's his answer? How does he want to speak for himself? Like, well, okay, speak for yourself then. What does he want to say?
I don't know. I don't think he's in a position to speak.
That's basically code for, yeah, you put up numbers, but nobody actually believes you're a leader. And you gotta understand, coming from Pat, that line hits different. This isn't LeBron saying it. This isn't KD or Shaq. This is a role player, a defensive irritant who's been traded around like an old Charger, trying to tell the world a franchise point guard isn't respected. Even if there's some truth buried in it, the delivery makes people laugh more than agree.
He's been to the playoffs 3 times.
Okay.
Right? I've been to the playoffs 9.
But here's the twist. Beverley didn't stop there. He doubled down with the resume talk, pointing to his 9 playoff trips compared to Trae's 3. He reminded listeners that in his first 7 years, he never missed the postseason, while hinting that Trae's individual shine hasn't translated to real winning.
I've talked to people who played in Atlanta. They don't want to play there.
Why?
They don't think he's a good leader. They don't think he's a good teammate.
And he framed it as a legacy issue. In his words, score all you want, make all the money you want, lead the league in assists. But if you don't win, it won't matter. Once you retire, people forget your name fast. That's where the beef stopped being surface-level banter. Beverley wasn't just clowning Trae's defense or his size. He was aiming at the foundation of his career. questioning his ability to lead, questioning his long-term relevance, questioning whether he'd be remembered at all. So for a guy still in his prime at 27, with his whole career ahead of him, that's more than trash talk. It's an existential swipe. And here's why it landed in headlines. Beverley knows how to stir conversation. He understands that if he says Trae Young isn't respected, ESPN will cut that into a soundbite, fans will argue about it, and suddenly he's back in the spotlight. That's been Pat's hustle for years. He might not win you games, but he'll win headlines. By putting Trae's name in his content, he officially upgraded the beef from a regular Twitter jab into an ongoing narrative. From that point on, every time Trae played, Pat's name was mentioned, which is, honestly, what he had been aiming for, in my opinion. So, after Beverley unloaded that podcast monologue, a lot of people expected Trae to fire back with something quick and petty. But instead, he sat down and gave a long, methodical response that didn't just clap back, it flipped the conversation completely.
This ain't the Atlanta Hawks. Because I would tell you myself, I have a lot of teammates I keep in touch with, a lot.
First, Trae called out the obvious. If Pat Bev is going to claim unnamed former Hawks teammates told him that his teammates don't like him, and that in the locker room they were calling it Trae's Hawks, then he should put names on it. State his source. Because Trae made it clear, he's in touch with a lot of his old teammates and none of them ever said that to Beverley. And that's when fans started leaning in. Because while Pat was making vague claims, Trae was coming out with full receipts. Then he dismantled the idea that Beverley had ever intimidated him. For Trae, Pat's whole defensive bulldog routine is just noise. He made it clear that he was never scared of him.
And the accolades say that you were. But I promise you, anytime you was on the court with me, I was never scared of you. I was never scared of Patty Bev.
Coming from a smaller guard who's been targeted by defenders his whole career, that's a strong flex. But Trae didn't stop at the personal. He turned the mirror back on Beverley's career and reminded the world about the infamous play-in game when Pat, with the Timberwolves, celebrated like he just won a championship after knocking out the Clippers. Trae's point was simple.
Ant-Man, Cat, we're not even going to talk about how we celebrate play-in wins. I win play-in games on the road, and I'm ready to get to the playoffs. You win play-in games at home, and you standing on the scores table acting like it's a championship. We celebrate wins different too. But let me get back to these guys. You've had some great teammates over these years that you've only been able to make the conference finals with because your impact was that strong. One time, James Harden, Russell Westbrook, Sweet Lemon Pepper Lou, and Dwight Howard. I can go on and on. Them is just the Hall of Famers that I could just pop on the list right now. Just not name some of the guys that I know may have listened to you when they was around you, but the way they act is not the way you act. Even from the young guys who are going to be future Hall of Famers. A guy who just won MVP, a guy who just won a championship.
And then came the moment. Instead of just quoting Drake's bench players talking like starters, I hate it, Trae broke it down. He acknowledged fans probably wanted him to just post the lyric and be done, but instead, he explained the subtext. It wasn't just a bar. It was the perfect way to frame what was happening. A role player making his name by throwing shade at an all-star.
But I promise it's not a selfish bone in my body. But I know a lot of people was wanting me probably just to listen to that Drake song and post that.
The Hawks themselves even joined in, posting a highlight reel of Trae frying Beverley in past matchups. It was the ultimate alley-oop, and fans loved it. Suddenly, the beef wasn't just Trae versus Pat, it was Atlanta versus Beverley. Pat, of course, couldn't leave it alone. He jumped back on YouTube, doubling down with the empty stats narrative, saying Trae's numbers don't translate to wins. He accused him of not being a real leader, claimed players don't want to play in Atlanta, and even went as far as to question Trae's work ethic, saying unlike other stars he's been around, he never sees Trae putting in work at the Hawks facility. But here's the thing. By this point, fans weren't buying it. Pat was trying to stretch the beef into let's psychoanalyze Trae Young's entire career arc. Meanwhile, Trae's calm, precise response made him look like the adult in the room. Even when he ended his rebuttal saying he had nothing but love for Beverley, that he could reach him if he really wanted to talk, it came across as the closer. The beef wasn't over, but this round was clearly won by Trae. Trae cooked him. And just when it felt like the back and forth might cool down, Kevin Durant slid into the mix. And KD, of all people, doesn't waste tweets on stuff he doesn't care about. Out of nowhere, he calls Beverley delusional. One word, that's it, But coming from KD, that's a haymaker. See, Beverly barking at stars is nothing new. He's had spats with Westbrook, Harden, and even KD himself back when Pat was with the Clippers. But this was different. KD wasn't protecting his own name. He was defending Trey, and that hit different. Because KD's a Hall of Famer in waiting, two-time Finals MVP, and a guy who doesn't exactly hand out compliments to younger guards. So when he called Pat out, it immediately validated Trey's side of the argument. Like if Trey's resume didn't already speak loud enough, KD co-signing the idea that Beverly's out of pocket made it feel like case closed. And as if one of the big guys defending Trey wasn't enough, LeBron James decided to join in. And this was what he had to say.
Keep Trey's name out your mouth, Pat, before this gets embarrassing for you.
LeBron didn't need to rant, didn't need a podcast, he didn't even need context. Just a few sharp words, and suddenly, the entire weight of King James fell on Beverly. If this were another role player piling on, nobody might have cared. But when LeBron basically implies you're reaching, your credibility goes up in smoke. Pat wanted attention, sure, but not like this. And LeBron's timing was perfect because he'd only just gotten started. LeBron jumping in wasn't just random internet noise. It actually said a lot about how he views his role in the league. He's always been protective of younger players, especially guards like Trey, who carry the future of the NBA. And that's something LeBron does differently from the guy he grew up idolizing. Think about it. Michael Jordan didn't exactly roll out the red carpet for the next generation, especially LeBron. He wasn't hyping up young stars or giving them public cosigns. If anything, MJ wanted to remind them he was still the alpha. But LeBron, he flips that script. He makes sure the young dudes feel backed, not boxed out. So when Beverly came for Trey, LeBron stepping in wasn't just about shutting down Pat. It was about setting a tone and protecting both Trey's reputation and the bigger message about respecting the next wave of players. But to really understand why Beverly leaned into this beef, you've got to zoom out and look at where he is in his career. Pat Bev built his name on defense, hustle, and pure chaos. But by the time this feud with Trey hit, he wasn't exactly locking up all-stars anymore. He is literally bouncing between teams, fighting for roster spots and staring down the possibility of going unsigned. That's the part that makes this whole thing hit differently. When you're 20, taking shots at stars is just confidence. When you're 35 and your box score reads 2 points, 3 fouls, and a podcast plug, it feels like something else. And that's where the attention economy comes in. Beverly figured out what a lot of older players are figuring out. You don't need to drop 30 to trend anymore. You just need a mic, a clip, and a quote spicy enough for Twitter to run wild with. His Pat Bev podcast became the real arena. And in that space, calling out Trey Young wasn't about the Hawks' win-loss column. It was about generating heat, pulling in views, and making himself part of the conversation long after his impact on the court started fading. But the danger in that hustle is obvious. NBA fans can smell when someone's forcing it. And the narrative started forming fast. Here's Pat Bev, who was closer to retirement than relevance, trying to stir up drama with a star just to stay visible. That's why his digs about Trey being an empty stats guy or a coach killer didn't land the way he thought. Instead of raising his own stock, he made Trey look like the one being unfairly targeted. It's not that Beverly doesn't believe in what he's saying. He's always been wired to compete and to bark at bigger names. But the timing, the career stage, and the fact that his biggest highlights now come with a podcast logo on them, that's what made it easy for LeBron and KD to flip this into a bigger lesson about clout chasing. But right when that narrative was peaking, LeBron dropped the second hammer.
Pat, if you're starving for attention or a job, hit me directly. Don't try to boost yourself by coming at that kid.
That was not just a clapback. That's a career obituary delivered by the face of the league. You could feel the shift instantly. Fans weren't debating Trey versus Pat anymore. The storyline became LeBron versus Pat, and that's a matchup nobody in NBA history has ever survived. The timing couldn't have been worse for Beverly. He's already on shaky ground, bouncing between short contracts and hinting at retirement if no team picks him up. So when LeBron framed his entire act as nothing more than a desperate plea for attention and a paycheck, it stuck. But here's what really made it sting. LeBron didn't just defend Trey, he cut off Beverly's whole playbook. Think about it. Pat Bev's podcast thrives on him being able to say wild things about stars and then forcing those stars to acknowledge him. That's how he stays relevant. But when LeBron tells him, if you need attention, come at me, he's basically stripping Beverly of his ability to punch down. Now, every time Beverly talks about Trey or anyone younger, it feels cheap because LeBron already framed it as desperation. And fans ate it up because the message hit home. The NBA has a long list of older players and ex-players who pivoted to the media and found success. I'm talking JJ Redick, Draymond Green, even Gilbert Arenas. But the difference is those guys built their shows on insight or personality. But Beverly tried to build his on beef, and LeBron just showed the world why that's a losing formula. The irony is that Pat probably thought poking Trey would be safe. A young star without a ring yet, easier to paint as overrated. But instead, it pulled in LeBron, KD, and the entire internet. And suddenly, the fight wasn't a fair one anymore. From that moment, the conversation stopped being, is Trae Young overrated? And became, is Patrick Beverly finished? And if you think Beverly's the only role player to pick a fight with a superstar and lose badly, think again. The NBA is full of these cautionary tales, and they all end the same way. The little guy talks, the big guy responds, and suddenly it's career damage control.
James gets very upset with Chalmers right here and gets in his face.
Take Mario Chalmers versus LeBron. Chalmers once barked at LeBron during a Heat game, and LeBron snapped back so hard that Wade had to physically hold him back. Chalmers wasn't a bad player, but the clip stuck. For the rest of his career, he was remembered as the guy who yelled at LeBron and almost got folded.
Indiana Pacers, including this, blowing in the ear of LeBron James, and James' reaction, he can't believe it. And I know you guys,
Or look at Lance Stevenson blowing in LeBron's ear during the Pacers' Heat battles. For a week, it was funny. For a season, it was memes. But by the time Lance was out of the league, the ear blow was his defining legacy. Not the big shots he actually hit. He turned himself into a gimmick, and gimmicks don't last. Even Dillon Brooks fell into the same trap. He called LeBron old before the Grizzlies played the Lakers in the 2023 playoffs. The Lakers cooked Memphis, and Dillon was shipped out before the dust settled. That's how fast reputations flip when you poke someone who outranks you in every possible way. The lesson is that role players can talk, but if you talk at a star, you'd better back it up. Otherwise, the moment lives forever, and not in a way you want. Pat Bev thought he was building content. Instead, he joined the Hall of Fame of guys who tried to climb the mountain and ended up as the meme. Here's the thing. NBA beefs aren't new, but this one feels different because of the world it happened in. The podcast era. 10 years ago, if Patrick Beverly wanted to take shots at Trae Young, he had to wait until a post-game presser and hope a reporter asked the right question. Now, he's got his own mic, his own show, and a direct line to millions of fans on YouTube, Spotify, and TikTok. That changes the math because a wild quote about Trae isn't just a soundbite. It's content. It's a clip that racks up views, feeds the algorithm, and maybe even pays the bills if the ad revenue hits right. And fans know that. That's why Beverly's comments didn't land the same way trash talk used to. Instead of feeling authentic, they felt like bait for clicks. Pat Bev leaned too heavy on conflict. And when you aim that at someone like Trae, the internet clock starts ticking. Because fans are smarter now. They've seen washed players chase clout, and they know when someone's forcing a storyline. That's why LeBron's call-out hit so hard. It confirmed what everyone suspected. This beef wasn't just about hoops, it was about the economics of attention. Beverly wanted to turn Trae into a storyline. Instead, LeBron flipped the script and turned Beverly into the cautionary tale. By the time the dust settled, the scoreboard was ugly. Pat Bev didn't just lose the beef, he lost control of his image. What started as an attempt to clown Trae Young turned into a spotlight on his own fall-off. When LeBron frames you as desperate for a job, GMs and execs hear that too. And in a league where locker room chemistry matters, no team wants to invite the distraction of a guy trending for the wrong reasons. Meanwhile, Trae came out looking better than ever. He barely had to lift a finger. His short clapbacks showed restraint, his long statement showed maturity, and with LeBron and KD defending him, his reputation shifted. Suddenly, Trae wasn't just the flashy scorer some folks doubted. He was the young star respected enough for the league's biggest names to protect. That's a huge credibility boost heading into his prime years. For Beverly, the next moves look tricky. If no contract comes, he'll probably double down on the podcast lane. And honestly, he could still make money there. Controversy sells. But the more he leans into chasing drama, the more he risks being remembered less as a defender and more as the guy who went viral for all the wrong reasons. The irony is that Beverley always prided himself on being authentic, the guy who never backed down. But in the eyes of fans, this whole thing made him look like exactly what he hates, a clout chaser. And once that label sticks, it's almost impossible to shake. For Trey, the next time Beverley or anyone else comes at him, he doesn't even need to answer, because now, everyone knows who'll step in to handle it. And that's the story of how Patrick Beverley went from trying to clown Trae Young to getting humbled by KD, LeBron, and the entire internet. But here's the real question. Is this the end of Pat Bev's NBA career, or just the beginning of his podcast villain era? If you enjoyed this video, hit that subscribe button and drop your take in the comments. Who do you think handled this beef the best? Trae with the quiet clapbacks, KD with the one-word kill shot, or LeBron with the final hammer? I'll be in the comments reading every take, so don't hold back.